It's worth at this point spending a couple of minutes just distinguishing between linear traditional organizations and exponential organizations at kind of what are the characteristics of the two of them. And this is really a table that's in the book on page 113. But in a traditional organization, you have a top-down hierarchical org structure versus an exponential organization. You have autonomous organizations and social technologies that give you an equivalent and a different form of functioning across them. In a linear traditional environment, you're driven by financial outcomes, versus with an EXO, you're driven by the MTP and the dashboards that give you a fast decision cycle. Okay? Third, in a traditional organization, you have linear sequential system. You do things one thing, then you do the next, then you do the next. In EXOs, you are doing experimentation and autonomy, and there's a lot of experiments running constantly across the organization. Fourth, in an old organization, a traditional organization, you have innovation primarily coming from within the organization, right? Within EXO, innovation primarily comes from outside the organization. That's a really big shift, using community, crowd, leased assets, staff on demand, algorithms, and so on, and interfaces to help manage it all. Next one is that in a traditional organization, strategic planning is really an exploration and a linear extrapolation from the past that looks forward into the future. Strategic planning, and I'll describe this more in the next segment, actually disappears in an EXO. You have very little strategic planning. You have your MTP, and you have experimentation and dashboards and kind of a shorter time plan on operation. Another attribute is on traditional organizations, risk is not tolerated. You have risk intolerance versus radical experimentation in an EXO. In a traditional organization, you have process inflexibility, versus in a EXO, you have constant process updating by autonomy and experimentation. In a traditional organization, you have a lot of employees. In an EXO, you have algorithms, community, and crowd, and all staff on demand, and all of the assets and people are on the outside of the organization, not on the inside. Okay? Same thing with assets. A traditional organization owns or controls its own assets. An EXO harnesses and leverages external assets so that it keeps it free from that. An existing organization is a typical organization traditionally is heavily invested in the status quo, versus an EXO, which is really progressing in a learning mechanism as to where this goes. A great kind of story that summarizes and brings all this together in terms of an old organization versus a new and highlights the differences is a story of Netflix. Netflix is really an exponential organization. And in 2011, Netflix announced the Netflix Prize, an incentive prize, $1 million for anybody that could improve their DVD recommendation algorithm for renting DVDs by 10% or more. And if you could do that, you would win the $1 million. 51,000 people participated and competed in this prize over like an 18-month period. And the Netflix at the end of that period, what happened at the end of that was 3 teams, each were able to improve the algorithm by 4%, 3%, 4% each roughly, were combined their efforts and delivered the 10% performance. They joined together as a team. They essentially gamed the contest in a sense, merged together their efforts, delivered the result, and Netflix paid them $1 million. Right? And a fascinating example of leveraging the external community and crowd to using an incentive prize to achieve a result. About 2,500 engineering hours went into the development of this algorithm. What's more interesting is that Netflix never implemented the algorithm. And when we were researching, they were really puzzled. They spent $1 million on this. All that time and effort went into implementing it. Why didn't they implement the algorithm? And as we researched it, we found that in the time that they ran the contest for improving DVD rentals, their streaming business had started to really take off, right? And they made a judgment call that, hey, the heuristics and the elements that go into rent streaming a show over Netflix are very different from a DVD rental. So if I rent a DVD, I get the family together on a Friday night, I get popcorn, we sit down, we watch a show or a movie, typically 2 hours long. If I'm streaming a show, I'm in a hotel room and I have an hour to watch a Netflix Mad Men episode or something before I go do something else. Then the heuristics were so different, they couldn't actually apply that algorithm to that bit. Now, I will posit that if Netflix had internally done that, built that algorithm, brought on the engineers, hired the team, spent the 2,500 man hours that were required to build that algorithm, they would have had a huge sunk cost bias to say, hey, we put all that effort into building it, we should damn well get value out of that investment, and they would have stayed with the rental business, they would not have moved to the streaming business. Right? But the fact that they did it outside the organization gave them the emotional independence as an organization to say, you know what, this business is going up, we don't have to worry about a team that we built up around this, is all outsourced, we can shift and be more agile and shift to the new demands of the business. And history, of course, tells us that that was the right course of action. So there is an example of an organization, by keeping your assets and your workforce outside, maximizing the agility in which we go forward. It used to be in the old way that scale was a big asset and scalability was a big asset, but tomorrow and in this new world, agility is a big asset.